The icy Cincinnati winter cut through everything like a blade, but Sergeant Tree Kessler barely felt the cold. He had only just returned from deployment a few days ago, still trying to adjust to civilian life, but something in his chest felt off like a weight he couldn't shake. As he walked down the nearly deserted street, his boots echoing against the frozen pavement, he saw a shape curled near a concrete bench. At first, he thought it was just another stray dog, but as he got closer, he stopped cold. The German Shepherd lying there was barely more than a skeleton fur matted with dirt, ribs jutting through thin skin, and eyes dull, half-closed, like the light had already left them. His legs twitched slightly, maybe from the cold, maybe from exhaustion. People passed by without a second glance, too busy or too numb to care. But Henry's heart dropped into his stomach. He recognized that scar, an ugly, jagged line above the right eye. He fell to his knees. No, it can't be, he whispered, but it was. That scar didn't lie. It was Efko. The dog who had once charged into gunfire beside him, the one who had knocked him out of the way of an explosion, who had saved his life more times than he could count, was now lying broken in the snow, discarded like trash. Henry's hands trembled as he reached out. His voice cracked as he said, "Foe, it's me, buddy." For a moment, nothing, just the faint sound of shallow breaths. Then, barely noticeable, Efko's tail moved a weak flicker, like the last glow of an ember trying to come back to life. It was almost nothing, but to Henry, it meant everything. That tiny sign of recognition hit him like a punch in the chest. This wasn't just some dog, it was his dog, his brother in arms. They had trusted each other with their lives. And now, Efko was here, barely clinging to life, on a cold sidewalk in the middle of nowhere. A voice behind him suddenly cut through the moment. "You know this dog," Henry turned, wiping at his eyes, startled. An older man stood there, bundled in a heavy black coat, his white hair blowing in the wind. He held a worn-out leash in one hand and wore a look of something like regret. Henry swallowed hard and said, "He was my partner. My brother in war." The old man looked down at the frail body on the ground and let out a long, shaky sigh. "Then you need to hear what happened to him, before it's too late." Henry barely registered the man's words. He was too busy trying to keep it together. He had seen a lot during his years in service: pain, loss, betrayal, but nothing had ever felt like this. FKO wasn't just a working dog. He was family. And seeing him like this, starving, shivering, too weak to lift his head, was almost more than Henry could bear. The bond they had shared during deployment had been forged in fire, in combat zones, in moments where life and death blurred. That kind of bond doesn't fade. It doesn't disappear with time or distance. But now, FKO looked like he barely recognized him. When Henry touched his fur, the dog flinched. That moment shattered him. FKO had never pulled away from him, not once. Something terrible had happened. Someone had hurt him. And now, looking at his partner suffering on the street, Henry knew one thing. Whatever it was, whoever did this, they were going to pay. But first, he had to save his friend, no matter what it took. Henry's pulse thudded in his ears as he faced the older man, struggling to make sense of the nightmare unfolding around him. Efko, the bravest soul he'd ever known, was now lying in the snow, breathing in shallow gasps, and this stranger was standing here with a leash in his hand, as if this was normal. Henry's voice was low, shaking with both fear and fury. What happened to him? The old man shifted uncomfortably, his gaze falling to the ground. "You're not gonna like it," he said quietly. Henry's blood ran cold. Then came the words that hit like a hammer to the chest. The military sold him. At first, Henry thought he misheard. "Sold him?" he echoed, almost in disbelief. The man nodded solemnly. After his last mission, they deemed him unfit for service. No ceremony, no recognition. Just a form, a signature. And they sold him off like he was nothing but used equipment. The words were like nails in Henry's heart. Though hadn't just served, he had bled, he had sacrificed, he had saved lives. And in return, they treated him like surplus gear. Henry's jaw tightened until it ached. His hands balled into fists at his sides. "Who bought him?" he demanded. The old man hesitated, then finally answered, "A private security firm. Baldwin Security. At first, they used him for patrols, high-risk jobs, long hours. But they didn't feed him right, didn't give him medical care. When he stopped performing, they tossed him aside, dumped him." Henry's breath caught in his throat. Efka wasn't just failed. He was abandoned, betrayed not once, but twice. First by the military that he had loyally served, then by a company that viewed him as nothing more than a tool. Rage and heartbreak roared inside Henry's chest as he looked down at the dog who had once been unstoppable, his strength, his protector, his shadow, now reduced to skin and bones, lying silent and trembling in the cold. How many more were there like FKO, he wondered, soldiers discarded by the very system they gave everything to? His vision blurred with fury. He'd seen cruelty in war, but this was different. This was calculated neglect, the kind that made monsters out of men who wore ties instead of uniforms. Foe let out a small, strained whimper, snapping Henry out of his thoughts. The sound cut deeper than any wound he had ever suffered in battle. He knelt again, brushing the dog's fur gently, trying not to let his anger spill over. "I got you now?" he whispered, voice breaking. "I'm not gonna leave you again." The old man stood silent for a moment, then softly said, "He doesn't have much time left. If you're gonna save him, you need to move now." Henry nodded sharply, lifting Phil carefully into his arms. He expected resistance, a flinch, some sign of pain, but Fko barely reacted. He was too far gone. That made Henry's resolve burn even hotter. As he turned to leave, the old man called after him, "There's a clinic a few blocks down. Tell them what happened. But be careful. Baldwin doesn't play fair." Henry didn't look back. "They'll learn what happens when you mess with a soldier's family," he said coldly. And with that, he carried his partner through the freezing night. His only mission now, keep Theo alive and make those responsible pay. Henry's arms burned as he carried Fko through the icy streets, his boots pounding against the pavement with urgency. The cold bit into his skin, but he didn't care. Every step felt like a race against death. The dog in his arms was barely breathing, his body limp, head resting against Henry's chest, eyes flickering open only for brief seconds. "Stay with me, buddy," Henry murmured, his voice rough with desperation. Just a little longer. He had carried wounded soldiers off the battlefield before, dragged men through the mud, through gunfire, but this felt different. This wasn't just another injured soul. This was his dog, his brother, the one who had pulled him out of hell more times than he could count. Now the roles were reversed, and it scared him more than any mission ever had. Finally, up ahead, like a small beacon in the dark, he saw it. A glowing red sign, 24-hour emergency vet clinic. He didn't slow down. He didn't knock. He kicked the doors open. Inside, the warm air hit him like a wave, but it brought no comfort. "I need help. Now!" he shouted. A woman in blue scrubs bolted from behind the counter, her eyes going wide at the sight of the soldier in full uniform, drenched in sweat, holding a nearly lifeless dog in his arms. "Oh my God!" she breathed. "Get him to the back!" Now, two vet techs appeared instantly, lifting Foe gently from Henry's grip and rushing through a pair of double doors. The absence of weight in his arms hit Henry like a gut punch. His arms ached, but his chest felt even emptier. He moved to follow, but a hand pressed against his chest. "Sir, please let us work." He didn't argue. He just stood there, fists clenched, breath shaking, heart pounding like a war drum in his ears. He had been here before in hospitals, waiting for word on men who'd been shot, blown up, broken. But this was worse. This wasn't just a teammate. This was family, and someone had let him rot in the street. After what felt like forever, a calm but concerned voice broke the silence. Henry turned to see a woman standing beside him in a white coat. Her name tag read Dr. Lillian Carter. "What happened to him?" she asked softly. For a moment, Henry couldn't speak. He swallowed hard, forcing the words out. "He served in the military. He was my partner overseas. But when he got injured, they sold him to people who didn't care. And when he couldn't perform anymore, they dumped him." Dr. Carter's jaw tightened. She had seen abuse before, but nothing like this. "We'll do everything we can," she assured him. Henry nodded, but his mind was already racing. He couldn't just sit here and wait. That's not what he was trained to do. He pulled out his phone, fingers steady despite the storm inside him. Baldwin Security. He typed the name in with clinical precision. A polished website appeared, flags, badges, smiling canine seconds, but Henry saw right through the facade. This wasn't patriotism. This was exploitation. As he dug deeper, into forums, watchdog pages, and buried threads, he found what he feared. Fako wasn't the only one. There were others, abused, broken, discarded. This wasn't just about saving one dog. This was about stopping a system that fed on loyalty, then threw it away when it became inconvenient. Henry sat in the cold, sterile waiting room, elbows resting on his knees. fingers interlocked so tightly his knuckles turned white. The buzzing of fluorescent lights above and the slow, steady tick of a wall clock made every second feel unbearable. He couldn't get the image of Efko out of his head, how light he felt in his arms, how his breathing was ragged and shallow. He had carried dying men before, watched life leave their eyes, but this was worse. This was betrayal, not just by one person, but by a system. The dog that had once shielded him from explosions, who had run into gunfire without hesitation, who had trusted blindly and loved fiercely, had been treated like an old piece of equipment, used and discarded. Henry's phone buzzed in his hand. It was Luke Calloway. Without thinking, he answered, "Tell me you've got something." Luke's voice on the other end was calm but grim. "Oh, I've got something, and none of it's good." Luke didn't sugarcoat it. Baldwin Security wasn't just some bad company. It was a front for something much darker. According to what he'd uncovered, they'd been buying up retired military canine seconds for years. No oversight, no accountability. They worked the dogs to exhaustion, provided no medical care, starved them, and when they broke, when their bodies gave out, they were either dumped, sold off, or worse. Some end up in the black market. Others get put down. The lucky ones end up like FKO, Luke said bitterly. Henry's grip tightened around the phone. His heart pounded harder with every word. "Who's running it?" he asked, though part of him already knew. There was a long pause on the line before Luke replied, "Lieutenant Colonel James Holloway." Henry's stomach turned. Of course it was Holloway. The same ruthless bastard who had commanded units in Afghanistan, who had treated men and dogs like chess pieces. He had pushed them all past their limits, broken them, then moved on without looking back. Now he was profiting off that same cruelty. Henry's eyes narrowed. "Send me everything you've got," he said, his voice hard as steel. "Because this son of a bitch just made it personal." As Henry stared at Holloway's name glowing on the screen, it all began to click. This wasn't just one bad deal. It was systemic. Holloway hadn't changed. He had simply moved his cruelty into the shadows. With powerful backers and government ties, he had created a machine that chewed up loyalty and spit out corpses. Luke's voice came back on the line, more serious than before. "He's not just sitting in an office, Henry. He oversees everything himself. I traced him to a private compound just outside Lexington, Kentucky. No official records, no oversight. He's there. Tonight." Henry didn't hesitate. His next move was clear. This wasn't about paperwork. This wasn't about courtrooms. This was about justice, the kind you only get when the system fails and someone decides enough is enough. "Send me the coordinates," Henry said, already moving for the door. "And Luke," he added, pausing just before hanging up, "I'm not turning back. I'm finishing this." Luke let out a slow breath on the other end. "Then make it count." The engine of Henry's truck hummed low as he sped down the highway, the city lights behind him growing smaller in the rearview mirror. The GPS screen glowed with the coordinates. Luke had sent coordinates that pointed directly to a private compound outside Lexington, Kentucky. Henry's jaw was tight, hands gripping the steering wheel hard enough to leave marks. Every mile that passed pulled him deeper into enemy territory, but this time there was no command, no mission briefing, no backup. Just him, his rage, and the truth. Holloway wasn't some ghost from his past anymore. He was flesh and blood, and he was still out there profiting off the pain of those who had served. This wasn't just about FKO anymore. It was about every dog that had been used and thrown away. It was about every soldier who believed the system would protect what mattered most. And now, Henry had to be the one to make it right. Luke's intel painted a grim picture. Baldwin's facility wasn't just some backwoods kennel. It was a fortified training ground, armed guards, surveillance systems, restricted access, designed for secrecy. From the outside, it looked like a private security operation, but underneath, it was a factory of cruelty. They didn't rehabilitate the dogs. They ran them into the ground. They trained them hard, fed them little, and when the dogs broke, when they couldn't perform, they vanished. Some ended up dead. Others were sold off in back channels no one wanted to talk about. The records didn't add up. The number of canine seconds decommissioned every year was far lower than the number reported missing or unaccounted for. Dozens, maybe hundreds. Henry felt sick just thinking about it. Holloway had turned loyalty into a business model, and FACO had been just one of many casualties. But tonight, the silence was over. Tonight, there would be consequences. The compound came into view just past a stretch of woods, its floodlights glowing through the trees like eyes watching for intruders. Henry parked off-road, killed the engine, and checked his gear. He wasn't there to start a war, but if one came, he'd be ready. His phone buzzed with one last message from Luke, entry point marked, East Perimeter. Watch for cameras. Henry pocketed the device and moved through the trees, every step silent and calculated. As he crouched behind a ridge overlooking the facility, he felt the same clarity he used to feel before a mission. All the noise faded. All that mattered was the objective. And this time, the objective wasn't intel. It wasn't territory. It was justice. He thought of Fako's eyes, dull, tired, robbed of the fire they once held. He thought of the way his body trembled from hunger, how he had flinched at Henry's touch. That image would never leave him. Holloway did that, and now, Henry was here to make sure he never did it again. Henry crouched low in the shadows of the tree line, eyes locked on the compound glowing in the night like a fortress. He followed the map Luke had sent, weaving through the east perimeter with the practiced movements of a soldier who had done this kind of thing before, just never on home soil, never against the people he once thought were on the same side. The closer he got, the more his gut twisted. Every building, every floodlight, every barking echo from behind locked fences told a story he already knew too well. He reached the weak point, a blind spot in the surveillance. Just like Luke said, heart steady, breath controlled, he slipped through. The deeper he moved inside, the more horrifying the truth became. Metal cages lined the back of one building, the air thick with the scent of urine and fear. In one pen, a dog barely lifted its head to look at him, eyes sunken, legs trembling. Another one had fresh stitches running down its side. None of them barked. They were too tired, too broken, just like FCO had been. Henry didn't speak. He didn't need to. Every silent stare from those caged animals screamed louder than words. This was the cost of profit, of power. Holloway had built a machine that fed on loyalty and discarded it without shame. And for what? Efficiency? Money? Control? Henry's fists clenched as he moved deeper into the facility, his mind flashing with images of Foucault in his prime, strong, fearless, bounding across a battlefield to save him. And now, the same dog had flinched at his touch. That betrayal wasn't abstract. It had a face, a name, and Henry wasn't leaving without confronting it. Inside the main building, he found the office polished floors, security monitors, thick doors. And behind one of them, Holloway, still dressed like he belonged on a base, like he hadn't sold out every value he once claimed to hold. For a long moment, the two men stared at each other. No words, just years of history and fury boiling in silence. Then Henry stepped forward, not as a soldier, but as a man who had come to collect a debt. In the days that followed, the story hit the news. Baldwin Security's operation was exposed. Holloway was arrested and investigations were launched into the handling of retired K-9 units across the country. Though still fragile, began to heal slowly under Henry's watch, and though his body remained scarred, the light in his eyes started to return. But what lingered the longest wasn't just the pain, it was the lesson. That loyalty isn't a resource to be used up. That those who serve human or animal deserve more than a quiet disposal when they're no longer useful. FCO's story opened eyes. It reminded people that behind every medal, behind every mission, there are lives, real, breathing lives who carry the cost. Henry hadn't just fought to save his friend. He fought to remind the world what honor really means. And maybe, just maybe, if enough people paid attention, no other soldier, two-legged or four, would be left behind again. Henry's boots crunched softly against the frost-covered grass as he moved deeper into the shadows of the compound. The sounds of the night seemed to hold their breath, no wind, no distant cars, just the faint hum of electricity and the occasional rustle of movement from inside. Every sense in his body was alive. He counted guards, traced light patterns, noted security camera positions. This wasn't rage guiding him anymore, it was training. Years of combat experience boiled to a laser-sharp focus. He wasn't charging in recklessly. He was calculating, tactical. Holloway had built his kingdom on silence, on the hope that no one would come looking. But Henry was here now, and he didn't come to knock. He came to end it. The deeper he went, the more the place revealed itself for what it was, a prison. Not just for dogs, but for everything they once stood for. Loyalty, service, sacrifice. All of it caged, muzzled, stripped of dignity. He reached one of the outer buildings where the real damage was hidden. It looked like a storage shed from the outside, but inside it was worse than he'd imagined. Rows of kennels lined both sides, dogs inside each one silent, thin, eyes watching him with a mix of fear and dull curiosity. No barking, no wagging tails, just hollow stares. Some had fresh bandages, others bore old wounds, untreated. The smell was unbearable: blood, rot, chemical disinfectant. But Henry didn't flinch. He walked slowly down the row, meeting their eyes one by one. These weren't just victims, they were soldiers, forgotten and discarded, and each one was a reminder of what FKO had narrowly escaped. In the far back corner, he saw a dog that looked just like him, same posture, same worn-down eyes. Henry's throat tightened. How many more would end up like FKO if this place wasn't stopped? He took out his phone, snapping photo after photo, evidence, proof. This wasn't going to be buried, not again. Then came the sound that made his blood run colder than the night air: a heavy door opening, boots approaching on gravel. Voices, Holloway's among them, calm, arrogant, like he had nothing to hide. Henry ducked behind a partition, listening. Always spoke with confidence, briefing someone on expendables and next quarter projections, like he was talking about equipment, not living beings. The man hadn't changed a bit, still treating loyalty like inventory, pain like data. Henry felt the heat rise in his chest, but he didn't move yet. He listened, recorded. This time, the world was going to hear it all. He waited until the voices faded down the hall, then slipped out the way he came, heart hammering, phone full of everything he needed. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was exposure. This was justice. And as he moved through the darkness, one quiet thought steadied his breath. Holloway had no idea the war had just begun.